Thanking Governor Wise and Tom Vander Ark.
The U.S. House about to come in for a pro forma session. No legislative business expected. Once they wrap up here in just a couple of minutes, we will take you live following that to the National Press Club. Republican presidential candidate and former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson will be speaking at the Press Club. The topic today, Republicans and social issues. Again, we'll have that live once the House wraps up with their pro forma session, and we'll go to that now live here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order, and the Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., August 19, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Mick Mulvaney to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer this afternoon will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Bill Curlin Hackett of the Interfaith Task Force on Homelessness from Bellevue, Washington.
Holy and gracious God, before you we humbly serve. We seek what is best and what makes for compassionate and reasoned leadership. We are blessed with the gift of differences that together and that in unity make us whole. Enable us to reconcile differences when at times such gifts separate us. Guide us toward the reconciliation that produces effective decisions, that builds engaged citizens, and that makes of us good neighbors to others less fortunate. These times call for our listening to each other with our minds and hearts as one neighbor seeks what is best for another. You have shown us, O God, what is good, that is, to love justice, to seek kindness, and to walk humbly with your strength made manifest among, between, and within us. May God thus be seen, may we thus be led, may we thus be known. Amen.
Amen. Pursuant to Section 5 of House Resolution Number 375, the Journal of the last day's proceedings is approved. And the Chair will now lead the House in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pursuant to Section 4 of House Resolution Number 375, legislative business is not dispensed with on this day. Chair lays before the House the communication from Mr. Hunter.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, this is to notify you formally pursuant to Rule 8 of the Rules of the House of Representatives that I have been served with a subpoena for production of business records issued by the Superior Court of California, County of San Diego. After consultation with the Office of General Counsel, I have determined that compliance with the subpoena is inconsistent with the privileges and rights of the House. Signed sincerely, Duncan D. Hunter, Member of Congress.
The Chair lays before the House a message from Karen Haas, the Clerk of the House.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, I have the honor to transmit a sealed envelope received from the White House on August 18, 2011 at 10:46 a.m. and said to contain a message from the President whereby he notifies the Congress that he has issued an executive order that takes additional steps with respect to the national emergency with the government of Syria first declared in Executive Order 13338 of May 11, 2004, as expanded in scope in Executive Order 13572 of April 29, 2011. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas, Clerk of the House.
Clerk will read the next message.
To the Congress of the United States, pursuant to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and in light of the Syria Accountability and Lebanese Sovereignty Restoration Act of 2003, I hereby report that I have issued an executive order that takes additional steps with respect to the government of Syria's continuing escalation of violence against the people of Syria and with respect to the national emergency declared in Executive Order 13338 of May 11, 2004, as modified in scope and relied upon for additional steps taken in Executive Order 13399 of April 25, 2006, Executive Order 13460 of February 13, 2008, Executive Order 13572 of April 29, 2011, and Executive Order 13573 of May 18, 2011. In Executive Order 13338, the President found that the actions of the government of Syria constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, and declared a national emergency to deal with that threat. To address that threat and to implement the SAA, the President in Executive Order 13338 blocked the property of certain persons and imposed additional prohibitions on certain transactions with respect to Syria. In Executive Order 13572, I expanded the scope of that national emergency and imposed additional sanctions. I have delegated to the Secretary of the Treasury the authority, in consultation with the Secretary of State, to take actions including the promulgation of rules and regulations and to employ all powers granted to the President by IEEPA as may be necessary to carry out the purposes of that order. All agencies of the United States government are directed to take all appropriate measures within their authority to carry out the provisions of the order. I am enclosing a copy of the executive order I have issued. Signed, Barack Obama, the White House.
This matter is referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and is ordered printed. With that, pursuant to Sections 3 and 4 of House Resolution 375, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, August 23, 2011.